Peter Zeihan is a reasonably famous geopolitical analyst on the internet. He's written some books, made some predictions. He's a reasonably big name. And he is someone who says things that are radically different than what I say. He says things like America will not only not collapse, but will boom and prosper economically. And that China will not only collapse, but balkanize into many smaller countries. And that France will become some kind of superpower. Yes, he says these things. And that Japan will take over Asia. And various other very weird shit. And many of you have asked my opinion about Peter Zeihan and what he says, and I will do so in this video. So is Peter Zeihan correct? Now, to be fair, as always, I'm objective and rational about these things. Peter Zeihan is very smart. He is very good with the data, at least certain cherry-picked data. I will talk about that a little bit. He has indeed made several predictions that were 100% right, and I don't disagree with everything that he says. He says a lot of things I completely agree with, and I'll cover some of those things in this video. That being said, he also says a lot of weird shit that makes absolutely no sense. He is convinced that France, Turkey, Argentina, and Japan will end up being these super powerhouse superpowers, and various other very weird things. So why is that? Why is he saying things that are the complete opposite of what I'm saying? Well, this gets into the topic of bias and objectivity, and whether or not you have a financial incentive to say the things publicly that you say you believe. So I will compare myself to Peter Zeihan. I have been talking about moving out of the United States, the collapsing United States, since around 2010. That was what, 12 years ago? Long time ago. Back in 2010, if you didn't know, this business, Sovereign CEO, did not exist. I was not selling any Five Flags material. I was not selling really any business material. I had several companies at the time, like I always do. But the only thing I was doing on the internet back in 2010 was selling dating material to men. Online dating techniques, first date techniques, and things like that. That's what I was selling. Nothing to have anything to do with Five Flags or the United States is collapsing or starting your own business or location-dependent income. I wasn't discussing any of those things and didn't even start discussing those things until 2014 when my book, The Unchained Man, was published. And even in that book, there is no mention in that book about Five Flags, moving out of the country, the United States collapsing, nothing in 2014. Yet, I was on my blogs as a public figure, because that was my primary method of communicating on the internet back then. I was talking about how I thought the United States was collapsing and I was going to leave the United States at some point. Matter of fact, in 2012, I published an article at my blogs called something like the top 7 reasons why I'm leaving the United States. And my point here is, what financial incentive did I have back then to say these things? None. Saying those things didn't make me any money, and I knew it at the time it wouldn't make me any money. As a matter of fact, it cost me money. I had a bunch of customers, not most of them, but it's a decent amount, who were interested in dating topics. And when I started talking about I'm leaving the United States because it's collapsing, people thought I was crazy. They said, Black Dragon, that was my name back then on the internet, Black Dragon has lost his marbles. What the hell is he talking about? America's not collapsing. As usual, people don't do any long-term economic analysis. They just look out their windows and everything looks fine. And they say, it's not collapsing. What the hell is Caleb talking about? And I'm sure I lost business by stating these views. In other words, I had no financial incentive to say these things. Therefore, you could trust that what I was saying was what I actually believe and the result of my actual analysis. Make sense? I had no financial incentive to say these things. Now, you could argue today I have some financial incentive to say that America is collapsing, the West is collapsing, you should move out of a collapsing Western country, because today I do sell some Five Flags courses and coaching programs. That's true, but guess what? I've only been selling those for about 1.5 years. Okay, I've been on the internet selling stuff since 2009, which is what, 15-ish years ago? And only the past 1.5 years, I've actually started monetizing the concept of Five Flags. However, I didn't do that until I did it myself. I didn't sell any Five Flags products until I myself developed a Five Flags lifestyle and moved out of the United States. Then I started doing it, again, to prove to you that I actually lived this advice. This is based on my real analysis. And once I actually did it, then I sold stuff because I didn't sell anything about it till I actually did it myself, which, by the way, is one of my policies. I don't teach anything until I have done it myself. That way I know what I'm talking about, number one, but also you know that the advice I'm giving you is coming from my actual heart and my actual real life analysis and not, well, if I say this, I'll make more money. Does that make sense? It's important you understand this because I'm about to switch gears now and talk about Peter Zeihan. Does Peter Zeihan have no financial incentive to say crazy shit like America will prosper and China will balkanize and Argentina is going to take over the world? No. Unfortunately, he does have a lot of financial incentive. Peter Zeihan comes out of the consulting firm, the global consulting firm, Stratfor. Stratfor is a big, giant geopolitical consulting firm whose clients read like the who's who of the elite who run the world. Lockheed Martin, Goldman Sachs, Coca-Cola. My God, that's where he came out of. Today, he runs his own consulting firm, and the only reason he says these things and writes his books is to get clients, big, giant corporate clients, big, giant American companies to pay him a shitload of money. Yes, he makes some money selling his books, but believe me, as a consultant for 25 years, I know how this works. He's not writing the books to sell a bunch of books and make a bunch of money from his books. He's selling his books to get big, giant consulting contracts, which he does. Good for him. I'm a capitalist. I like it when people work hard and make money. That's great. But here's the problem. He knows that his target audience are big, giant American corporations. So does he want to say America is collapsing and China will probably rule the world in the 21st century? Is that what he wants to say? Is that the kind of messaging his potential contracts and current clients want to hear? No. And he knows this. He has a direct and clear financial incentive to say the things that he is saying, and he has always had financial incentive to say these things, unlike someone like me who has never had a financial incentive to say the things I'm saying up until a year and a half ago after I physically did it myself to show you that I'm serious. He has got to say things like China's collapsing, America will do great, blah, blah, blah. He's got to say these things because if he didn't say these things, he would damage his primary goal of getting consulting clients for his consulting firm. So every time you hear Peter Zeihan say something, make a prediction, or state some kind of conclusion he's made, you must remember that he has had and always has had tremendous financial incentive to say these things. And that affects his credibility. Unfortunately, that's the case. It's an issue of bias. I pride myself, and I say this over and over again, that I'm objective and rational. Matter of fact, I'll talk more about that in a minute. So I am always going out of my way to give you the objective, rational analysis as I see it. Not if I say this, then I'll make more money, even though it might not be accurate. But Peter Zeihan is not in that category. He is in a world of bias, so you've got to remember that every time you hear anything he says. And this is not a personal attack on Peter Zeihan. He seems like a very nice person. I've seen him and interviewed on YouTube. He seems like a really nice guy. He seems like a well-meaning guy. Nothing personal against him. I'm just giving you the facts that he lives in a very biased world instead of an objective reality-based world that I live in. This is also not to say that I'm always right. I've made some errors. I've made some predictions that didn't work out. It's a small percentage of the predictions I make. Most of my predictions have worked. But I'm not saying I'm perfect either. I'm saying I'm coming at this from somewhere objective and less biased than Peter Zeihan. By the way, we do at least 3 videos a week here on how to set up your own location-independent business so you can move to a less bad country or at least set up an international backup plan and do all these things for very little money. So if that content is of interest to you, you should subscribe to this channel, put a like on this video, click the notification bell, and leave a comment on this video so that you get that content. The next challenge with Peter Zeihan's predictions and analysis is that, and this is a little complicated, I'll do my best to explain it, he is very good at looking at the economic data and the other data of individual nations within themselves. He is very, very poor at looking at how nations interact with each other. He is very poor at either understanding or, I think, acknowledging concepts like globalization, globalism, global trade, the effects on wars in other countries and things like that. I will give you several examples. Here's the biggest example, the easiest one I can think of off the top of my head. He says that Germany will collapse, and he is right. This is where he and I completely agree. I have been saying for many years that Germany will likely be the first nation in Europe to collapse, and it'll probably be the nation that collapses the hardest by far. Germans are in very big trouble, and if you still live in Germany, I don't know what you're smoking. You should have moved out of Germany a very long time ago. Germany is in very, very big trouble. He gives specific predictions on how Germany will drop to 1/4 of its current economic activity. Pretty horrible stuff. He's probably right about that. But then he turns right around and says that France will become some kind of superpower. France, a country bordering Germany. Germany is one of France's biggest trading partners. So if Germany's going to collapse, how does it make any sense that France is going to suddenly prosper and boom economically? Have you been to Paris lately? Paris is becoming a high crime rate shithole. There are some people that argue that Paris has already become a shithole. It's awful. Paris has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse for a long, long time, and that trend is going to continue, and this is the country that Peter Zeihan thinks will be some kind of superpower. What? How does that make any sense? It's because he's looking at data within Germany, then forgetting about all that, and then looking at data within France. That's what he tends to do. Another example, in early 2020, he made a prediction that the recession in China would continue post the first quarter of 2020 because of cerveza sickness. He said, oh my gosh, China won't have anyone to sell to because of cerveza, so they're going to be in a state of recession in the second quarter of 2020. He was wrong. China's GDP grew by almost 4% in 2020's second quarter. Why is that? Because China sells to other countries things like medicine, medical equipment, and disposable medical items. Most masks worn in the world during cerveza were manufactured and shipped from where? China. But again, that went way past him. He didn't even look at those aspects because he was too focused on his key numbers inside China. Here's another example regarding China, and I'll cover his opinions about China in a few minutes. He has talked about how China is going to not only collapse, but encounter a famine. People in China are all going to starve to death because the soil in China isn't very good, okay, which is technically true. But here's the problem. He doesn't realize that Chinese agricultural FDI, that means direct foreign investment, that's when a country buys into land or other companies in other countries, has increased by billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, with China buying land all over Southeast Asia, all over Africa, and even in Russia's Far East, where the soil is amazing, where they can access this soil and use it for agricultural purposes for their own people. Again, he didn't look at that. He didn't even look at that data because he was too focused on what's inside China. And that's his myopic view, is individual countries, what's happening in individual countries, irrelevant what's happening right around those countries. I mean, his craziest prediction, what I think is craziest, is that America will completely withdraw from the world, become totally isolationist, and then boom economically. How does that work? Do you have any idea what an important component free trade and trade with other nations is to the health of the economics of a nation? That's how places like Hong Kong and Singapore, who have no natural resources, became the top economies in the world. Not because of resources they had in those countries, but because of trade with other countries. The United States is no different. How well do you think the United States will do when it's not trading with other countries and not involved in foreign affairs? It doesn't make any sense. Now, really quick, I am sure if you're a big Peter Zeihan supporter, you could nitpick little aspects of everything I'm saying, but you can't nitpick the entire picture, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to do that, but if you think you can in the comments, go ahead and let me know. Third problem with Peter Zeihan, and this is big, and this is difficult to talk about, so I have to encase my words in certain language to be appropriate with YouTube and to not disparage anyone. But the bottom line is that Peter Zeihan is extremely biased against China. And what do I mean by that? Well, I already talked about why he's biased early in the video. I already covered that. Big American corporations want to hear that China's in big trouble. They don't want to hear that China's going to take over the world. So obviously he has to say that China has problems. However, you can see his bias because everything he says about China just about is negative. Everything comes out of his mouth about China is bad, horrible, terrible, awful. That alone should tell you the bias. Whereas I have said positive things about China and negative things about China. For example, I have said that yes, despite its numerous serious problems that it's now encountering, China will most likely be the great power of the world in the 21st century, the same way America was in the 20th century. But I have also said that China is completely insane by having a president for life, that China is completely nuts by having this zero cerveza sickness policy and shutting down entire cities like Shanghai well past when cerveza sickness was a problem. I have said, and I was saying this 5-6 years ago, that China is going to run into the biggest real estate bubble in human history. I said that many, many years ago, far before the current crisis they're having now in their real estate markets. And so again, I have been objective and non-biased. I've said positive things about China. I've said horrible negative things about China. I've said both. What would your opinion be of me if everything I said about China was positive? Everything that came out of my mouth that China was positive. You'd be like, a little biased. Okay, I don't think I could trust you. Peter Zeihan, everything comes out of his mouth is negative. So what does that say? What does that indicate to you? Does that indicate rational, objective, fact-based analysis, or does that indicate to you some sort of bias? I know what it indicates to me, bias. In terms of China collapsing, by the way, this is a little off topic for the video, but I'll throw this out there. There is a really neat list on the internet. You could probably Google around and find this. And it shows that American news has been saying that China is collapsing every 2 years or so since the early 1990s. It goes all the way back to 1990. China's screwed. 2 years ago, oh, China's screwed now. 1994, China's fucked now. Oh my God. 1996, China's effed. Every 1 or 2 years since the 90s. China apparently is always collapsing. China's facing a lot of very serious problems. But China also has a lot of options to solve those problems, many of which I don't like, but China could implement. China could embrace automation. China could embrace means testing for pensions. China could open themselves up to immigration. They have all kinds of options. And China has such a strong, robust economy, they can have problems, even negative growth, for a long time before they have any real serious problems systemically in the Chinese system. I would point you to Japan, which has basically been a zombie economy for 25 years. Has Japan collapsed? No. Very similar to China. The fundamentals of China are actually very good despite their numerous, very serious problems. And as I've said many times, the United States, on its way from a bunch of backwater farmers to the greatest superpower the world has ever seen, had all kinds of horrific problems during their rise to prominence. They had recessions, they had depressions, they had civil wars, they had assassinations, they had all kinds of horrible bank runs, horrible problems, yet America ended up at the top. China probably will too. And to say everything about China is negative indicates bias, and it should to you. Last thing about Peter Zeihan, and this is just my opinion, is that unlike people like me, he doesn't do a lot of on-the-ground research. He talks about these countries, and he's never been there. You know, I've seen this a lot. A lot of analysts on the internet think they know all about these countries, and they've never actually spent any time in these countries on the ground, learning with real-life experience what is going on in these countries. That's kind of an epidemic on the internet right now. People who are experts on Paraguay who've never been to Paraguay, and I've been there a billion times. When I moved to Dubai, there were all these experts on Dubai telling me how horrible it'd be who had never been to Dubai, and I had been to Dubai numerous times over a course of many years. And Peter Zeihan is kind of in that category. He's not an on-the-ground guy like someone like Jim Rogers is. He's an analyst. He sits down in his office and goes over numbers, and then he makes predictions from those numbers. Very biased numbers, only focus on individual nations. Bottom line, Peter Zeihan is a good guy, a very smart guy who's very good with numbers, who is very biased because he has to be, and anything he says must be suspect because of these factors. If you want more information on China, you can watch this video right here on why China will end up ruling Latin America, and I'll see you in that video.